Are you curious about how Capstone Leadership Solutions can help your small healthcare organization to improve and grow with more speed and ease? If so, reach out to us at capstoneleadership.net. There's a contact us page, or you can email us at info@capstoneleadership.net. We're here to help. We talk about culture being this is how we do things around here. And teams, entire departments and teams can have developed these really strongholds in how they do things around here. And some of those aren't always positive or helpful or favorable to the culture and even the performance and outcomes that the team is able to achieve.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage.
So glad you're here for another episode of Culture Change RX. It's me, Sue Tetzlaff, co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions and host of the show. And today's episode is a solo episode focused on the topic that I'm just going to call toxic office makeover. So oftentimes when we're talking about culture change strategies on this podcast, we're really looking at that organization-wide top-level efforts that in our view and our experience involves employee-driven contributions and also elevated leadership effectiveness contributions that help the organization on its pathway to creating a thriving and growing healthcare organization. So we're really helping an organization execute an organization-wide strategy to elevate its culture, its employee engagement, and its leadership effectiveness. But today I want to zoom in to that level of local leadership and local culture and local either positive or toxic workplace culture. I heard it said by someone else just recently that leadership is local and culture is local. And what that means to me when I hear that is that our workplace culture isn't necessarily just defined by mission statements or values posted on the wall or the website, but by the people you interact with the most each day. And as a department or an office or team or group of people that are doing the day-to-day work organized into your specific team members that you're working with each day and your specific boss, if you're an employee in that department, that specific leader, that specific boss is really important to the culture and the day-to-day work experience. I think that becomes relatable when you think about, have you ever had a job you loved until the leader changed? Or you took a role because it looked great on paper, but it felt awful in practice. And this is something that we see in our work with entire organizations when we are engaged with them to transform their organization into a thriving, growing healthcare organization, is that when these efforts are being deployed, when they are in place and happening, they take root, they take hold in individual departments or offices or teams to various levels of success. So the same efforts that are being applied to every single department, every single team, every single office in the entire organization, these same improvement efforts and initiatives are being applied organization-wide. Yet some departments, some teams seem to be so resistant to grabbing on and taking hold to an improved workplace, an improved culture. And in fact, their department or their office might be described as toxic. But even if you're not a leader of a team or a department that you describe as having a toxic culture, if it's less than optimal, what I'm going to talk about next will also benefit you and your team as well. And in my 30 years as both a healthcare executive myself, but also then a strategist, trainer, and coach to dozens of healthcare organizations, I see that there's three areas that need to be addressed strategically. One, two, or all three that need to be addressed strategically at that local level when there's opportunity to turn around a toxic culture or to elevate one that could be better than it is today. And those three areas are one, the leadership of the department, two, the entire team dynamics of the department, and then three, specific individuals and their role in the department and its current culture. So let's first talk about the leadership of the department or the office or the team. A toxic culture often reflects the leadership behaviors, such as the tone, the trust, the consistency, the feedback, and the fairness of the leader of the department. So when I mentioned earlier, leadership is local, right? That direct leader of individuals, an entire team or department, it matters a lot, right? So the CEO, the vice presidents, the others above that leader can't or won't make as big an impact on the direct culture and the day-to-day culture of a department than that actual frontline leader. So that frontline leader, very important to the culture of the department. So when it comes to the leader, that local level leader, there's three areas that I see most where they present an opportunity to change for the better that will make a positive impact on the entire department and its culture and its team dynamics. The first one being is that the negativity or any of the other problem behaviors that are creating this suboptimal or even toxic work environment are actually being displayed and led and role modeled by the leader themselves. So maybe they are the chief negativity officer. Maybe they are the one that's complaining and managing down others, such as their own executives, administration, organization, or other departments or other team members. So these behaviors that we don't want displayed by anyone in the organization are being displayed and role modeled by the leader in that department. So it really gives a permission slip to everyone that, if the leader behaves this way, we can all behave in this way. I mentioned a leader maybe being the chief negativity officer. I saw that happen once with a med-surg nursing manager where she came to me and she's like, wow, my whole department is so negative. What can I do about it? And I said, first, let's look in the mirror, right? And what we did was a communication audit. And we took her last 10 emails that she sent out as department-wide communications to her staff. And we looked for the negativity or positivity in the tone of the communication. And no surprise, they were all negative. So she herself was the leader of negative communication in her department. She was communicating it in writing. And if you're communicating it in writing, most likely that's how you're communicating verbally as well, which she recognized. And she really needed to start to learn to reframe her communications and her leadership of her team in a more positive way. So, number one, what are the behaviors of the leader and are they a role model for what we want for everyone? And if not, that's an opportunity for change. The next with the leader is really, maybe being derelict in their duties. So, day to day operations can get chaotic when a leader doesn't know how to lead, right? And in our work, we call that the leadership bundle or the standard work of leaders and the core 9 practices of leaders, such as giving and receiving feedback, setting and achieving goals, setting and achieving high standards, those kind of things. And so when a leader is not able to lead effectively the day-to-day operations, chaos will ensue, right? So there's negative consequences in morale, in outcomes of the day-to-day work, and that spills over into how people feel about their work and how they behave towards their work when operations are chaotic or suboptimal. And the leader doesn't know what to do or how to organize their leadership effectiveness and their actions to be able to improve day-to-day operations. And in the absence of that, the employees can't feel proud about the work that they're doing. They can feel frustrated and complain or become even hopeless about the day-to-day operations, obviously not creating a thriving workplace culture when operations are in chaos. And then another leadership aspect that leads to negative cultural implications in a department or office is the inability or the avoidance of the leader to properly deal with what we're going to talk about next, the team dynamics and or the individual dynamics of the team members with behaviors that are undesirable. So this might look like unaddressed conflict, unclear expectations about behaviors, really this inability to muster the will and master the skill to elevate team and or individual behaviors. Behavior change is the hardest of all for individuals and for entire teams. So avoidance or the inability for leaders to properly be able to manage behaviors and elevate behaviors is going to have an impact on the culture of the entire department or office and team. So, as you can see here, the leader of the department and how they're behaving and performing can dramatically affect the dynamics of the team and the culture of the department or the office. So, number two, let's talk about the team dynamics as a whole. So it's been always interesting to me to see that dysfunction can persist even with a strong leader. And that's because team habits and cliques and norms really matter. And they can really take a stronghold, and it can really be a challenge for even a strong and effective leader to be able to shift the dynamics of an entire team. We talk about culture being this is how we do things around here. And teams, entire departments and teams can have developed these really strongholds in how they do things around here. And some of those aren't always positive or helpful or favorable to the culture and even the performance and outcomes that the team is able to achieve. I'll give an example of one of those behaviors or habits that a department had. It was a cardiopulmonary department in a hospital setting. And this department had this routine or ritual where every day at their lunch hour, they ate together in their break room. So they gathered together, and you could see that maybe this would be a positive team building habit that they had, was that they would come together and they would share their meal together and socialize together. However, the unhelpful part about that was what they did during that time together was actually not positive, it was negative. So, what they would do is they had this habit of whatever happened during the first half of their workday before they gathered together for lunch. Maybe it was something that happened when a cardiopulmonary member was working in an outpatient department and doing outpatient testing with different patients, or maybe it was a cardiopulmonary team member that was working and assigned to the ER that day, and some interactions that they had with the providers, physicians, or staff down in that department. But basically, what they would do is they would collect any negative, bad things that happened during their morning, and they would share those at lunch. So they basically went about collecting negative, complaining stories about patients, about physicians, about other departments or other team members in other departments. And they would spend their whole lunch hours complaining and sharing these negative stories. And that's how they ate their lunch every day. Well, you can imagine that a team dynamic like that is not going to lead to a healthy culture and positive culture in the workplace, either amongst them, but also has an impact in how they relate or interact with the other people in the other departments within the entire organization. So it's creating like this we, they kind of culture in their department. We're better in these ways, they're lesser or negative in these ways. And that's not a team dynamic or a culture that you want in a department and in an entire organization as well. So, to shift that, what the leader did to help facilitate a change in this was to one, call it out. I noticed, right? I noticed that during our lunch hours, when we gather together, that this is the theme of the conversation. Can we and should we shift that? And if we do, what does that look like? And really putting that on the employees to say, what would it look like? How could we make this different? Do we want to make this different? What they decided was they were just going to start with one day where they were going to stop that behavior. And they weren't going to be positive. They were just not going to do that and see what happened. And then they started with 2 days and 3 days. And then they really started to be intentional about, let's look for things going well in our mornings and report those at lunch. So day by day, shift by shift, they were able to turn that around, where negativity and complaining during their mealtime was no longer the accepted norm, but it was changed to positive conversation and appreciation and recognition for what's going well in their days versus what isn't. So those rituals and routines are really helpful to identify both ones that are helpful and maybe ones that aren't in the team. Another thing that's very important to the team dynamics is having standards of behavior that apply to everyone. So that's very clearly known. And in our work, we have these standards be developed as an organization-wide initiative by an employee-driven team, but then they are embraced and adopted and committed to at the local team level and individual level. And so really focusing around how is our team bringing and keeping those high standards alive that are designed for everyone in the organization to guide behavior. And so another activity that can be helpful is to take that set of desired behaviors that are established for the entire organization and do a check-in as a department to say, as a department, which of these behaviors are our strong points and which of these behaviors are ones that we could improve as an entire team and we could focus on. And then deciding what are the actions, what are the activities that it's going to take to make an improvement as an entire team to uphold those standards collectively and to work together to do that. So bringing and keeping those behavior standards alive, and then really looking at the rituals and routines of the department, which ones are positive and which ones are negative, which ones are helpful and which ones aren't. And then this third lever is really the individuals in the department. And oftentimes it may just be one individual in the department. So sometimes one person really is toxic, and often they're a high performer. They're very smart. They know their job. They can do their job well, but their behavior is toxic. And therefore, their behavior has been tolerated, right? It's gone unaddressed by their team members and also the leader because of this deference to their competency in their performance of their job duties. That's a very common scenario that we see in healthcare organizations in particular. And again, it may be this scenario where the leader is avoiding and doesn't know how to properly address behavior. And also, there's this fear of turnover, right? And so we don't want to lose a very competent, high performing employee. The department may already be short staffed. It may be a really hard position to recruit for. And there's lots of rationale or traps that we fall into that cause a leader and an entire team to accept and tolerate these behaviors. So we often have to get to the place where we realize that the cost of keeping a toxic person is often higher than the cost of replacing them. However, in our work, we have uncovered a tactic that leaders can employ, which is something that we call a 5-point correction conversation. It's not going to work 100%, but it gives leaders the best chance. And if they're able to muster the will and master the skill of this 5-point correction conversation and the follow-up activities after that conversation, we really can have a formalized process that helps elevate, moves up the behavior of chronic persistent behavior that's well below our standards, and it can actually turn that around, or it leads that employee on a pathway of moving out of the organization using the organization's disciplinary process. For this type of shift to happen in an individual, they've got to want the change and they've got to have the proper support for the change from their leader and even possibly from their team. So an example I can give with this is in a small community hospital, they had a CT tech in the radiology department. He was the only primary one that served in this role as the organization's CT tech. He was a high performer in the way that he did his CTs. However, his behavior, primarily with patients, was often rude and rough, and with certain patients, even more so. Patients would complain about his behavior. Oftentimes it wasn't witnessed because he may be alone conducting these procedures, but sometimes it was witnessed by his peers and even leaders, and it went unaddressed or unconfronted. It actually went on for years and was escalating and getting more problematic, so much to a point that I don't want to share the specific example, but it actually did create harm to a patient. And even with that, the leader had a hard time feeling willing to either discipline this employee or put them on a corrective action plan that might lead to termination. Fortunately, this was one of those examples where our helpfulness was able to intervene, and this 5-point correction conversation and preparing the leader along with human resources to address this employee using this approach was deployed. And what was exciting was to see the employee make the decision to change his behavior, to want to engage in the process of improving and changing his behavior. And that really has to happen. In fact, he went to their next staff meeting and he said to his team members, I've been wrong in how I've been interacting with my patients. You've seen it, I know it, and I want to change it. And I'm asking for your help. He admitted that he was on a work plan and that his job was on the line if he didn't change his behavior and his ways. And he was owning up to his entire team that he had a problem and he was working on fixing it. And he was asking for their help. That sets him up for a high chance of success when he takes that ownership and has that willingness. In the absence of that, his team members and his leaders, no matter how much they tried and how much they wanted to help him, it likely would not have the same outcome. There is a happy ending to this story. This actual CT tech ended up going on to have a much longer and amazing career as a CT tech, but then he actually moved on to being part of the patient experience team for their entire organization to contribute to improving service excellence and making care more safe and satisfying for all patients. So he made a dramatic shift from being a problem employee whose behavior was chronically and persistently below the standards that we would set for a person in his role to being someone who was part of the organization-wide efforts to improve safe and satisfying care for all patients. That isn't always the outcome. Sometimes the organization will need to, move that person along the path of losing their employment. So it doesn't always happen that way, that there is a happy ending as far as the employee staying on, being a productive, valued member of the team in both their performance and their behavior. And sometimes the consequences for their continued behavior that's below standard will cause them to progress through discipline to the point of termination. So, as I've shared with you today, if there is a toxic office situation, a toxic team or department situation, often the levers are the leader, the team dynamics, and possibly even individual or specific employees. It's often a combination of these three levers that lead to the most favorable team cultures. Yet again, the commonality here is that leadership is local and culture is local. Change doesn't just depend on the CEO or the administrative team or the organization-wide efforts. It is those local efforts, the local leader, the local teams, the individual employees. So if you're a department leader out there, you don't need to wait for somebody from above. You don't need to have new buildings or new budget to fix a toxic culture. Sometimes all you need is a mirror, a brave conversation or so, and a commitment to showing up differently each and every day. You don't have to tolerate toxicity. You can lead the change. And these are the three levers that can help you do it. If you've stayed to the end of this episode, that really tells me that there's some commitment on your part to creating a better culture where you work. So I want to recognize that and honor that here as we close up today, and tune in next week for another episode of Culture Change RX. A new episode drops each Wednesday. Bye now.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.